This specific species is a really tough guy. It can stay alive without feeding for 1 month or even more.
That's what I'm imagining, but is that right?
It's really, really difficult. So in the oceans, our prime goal should be prevention.
Ocean Calls.
Hello and welcome to Ocean Calls, the podcast in which we delve into the issues making waves on our blue planet. I'm Euronews science reporter Jeremy Wilkes and I'm your host. And throughout this season, we've covered a myriad of topics: restoring fish stocks, cleaning unexploded bombs from the seafloor, and using AI to make better decisions about our ocean. And this time we'll be discussing aliens invading our seas. Unlike the little weird extraterrestrials that you see in sci-fi movies, we're not talking about aliens kidnapping anyone, but these alien species do change our ecosystems. They often degrade them and they edge out native species. And according to the European Environment Agency, approximately 20 new non-native animals and plants are discovered in European waters every year, and 70% of them are found in the Mediterranean. So why is that happening? Are these invasive species a danger? Do they have untapped potential, perhaps? Is it a case of if you can't beat them, eat them, making invasive species a new seafood target for local fishers to catch and to put onto the restaurant menus and markets? Or are there unintended consequences with doing that? To discuss this question and to try and understand more about invasive species, I'm joined by a guest, João Canning-Clode, the chairman of the expert group on the introduction and transfer of marine organisms at ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. Hi, João.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being with us. And Voula Karachle, research director at the Hellenic Centre for Marine Research in Greece. Hi, Voula.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Very nice to see you both. A bit of an icebreaker question. What are some of the most unusual or exotic invasive species that we have recently discovered in European waters? Are there some real eye-catching newcomers? João.
Sure. As you said, we kind of find 20 new marine organisms, invasive marine organisms in the world actually every year. And some are very old and some are very new. I would highlight an algae called Rugulopteris occuri, and actually I'm based in Madeira, and we actually here have a monitoring program that started 10 years ago. We have identified 70 non-indigenous species in Madeira waters, and we found this brown algae only 2 years ago, and I can tell you it's the first one that has really like a pest behavior. So it gets in our beaches, and of course, tourists don't like it. But
what does it look like?
It's a brown algae. Looks like sargassum. We also, you can find it in the Azores as well, in the south coast of Spain, and it really forms a lot of biomass in our beaches, and that's not really nice especially for the tourism sector. So actually the decision makers are a bit concerned about this. There is not much to do except cleaning.
Can you eat it?
I don't think you can eat it. I heard there's some work on using it as fertilizer. Right. For agriculture purposes. But that's it. For sure more work needs to be done. But I would highlight this algae as a recent
recent nasty newcomer.
Yes.
Yeah. Voula?
Well, I will take you to the other end, the East Mediterranean, and from algae to fish. They are not actually newcomers. They've been around quite some time now. So I will just name two species. One is the lionfish. It first arrived in the Mediterranean in 1991, but it started its fast spread in later on, like in the 2000s. It's edible and extremely very tasty and extremely very beautiful to see. So it's an aquarium species, but it can also be commercialized and eaten. And the other one is the silver-cheeked toadfish, Lagocephalus scleratus. That is a poisonous fish. It is quite an alarming species for us in the Eastern Mediterranean.
What does that look like?
It looks like this without the ears. It looks like a bat. It's bat shaped. The belly is white and the back is gray with black spots. The mouth looks like that of a rabbit. The teeth are extremely very strong. It's a poisonous species, so you are not allowed to eat it at any case.
What would happen if you ate it? Would you die if you ate it, or would you just feel ill?
In cases, yes. We have a recent research. It was where we recorded incidents of poisoning, attacks, and deaths. And we have in the Eastern Mediterranean about 28 deaths, if I remember correct the number.
Wow.
Of people eating
What's
it.
that called again?
Lagocephalus scleratus is the scientific name. The common name in English is silver-cheeked toadfish.
Okay.
Basically, we refer to it as Lagocephalus.
Okay. And you just need to look those up if you're fishing around there, and definitely don't eat one.
Yes, because we had some incidents like in Greece and in Cyprus where people fished, went recreational fishing.
Yeah.
They caught it. They didn't know what it was. They ate it, and then they were hospitalized for precautionary reasons. Those were not fatalities.
I've noticed, and you're going to tell me more, that there's a difference between non-native species and then kind of invasive species.
Mm-hmm.
João, can you just break it down for us? What's the difference? How do you define the difference between those two?
Yeah, very kind of complex questions, and we have many discussions on terminology in invasion science, both in the terrestrial and aquatic systems. Just to give you an idea, there are more than 120 papers just discussing terminology. So there is no consensus. But I mean, for an easy language, I would say I actually prefer the term non-indigenous species because it's more broad. So if you have a species that were never in your known location and it suddenly showed up, that's considered a non-indigenous species. But then if this species spreads and starts to become a pest and has like this invasive behavior with both ecological and economic impacts, then the scientific community calls it invasive. So, I mean, it's more complex than this, but I think for our audience, this is quite simple. I'm not sure what Voula thinks.
Yeah, Voula, go ahead and break it down from your point of view as well.
I think that you covered pretty much everything. Non-indigenous is the more preferred terminology.
Right.
And it's something you've never seen before. And invasive is a non-indigenous that becomes an issue.
And the majority would be these non-indigenous. They've turned up, but they're not necessarily posing a problem. Is that right?
True.
Exactly. I mean, in our case, as I told you, in our Madeira system, we have 70 non-indigenous species, but only a couple are actually considered an issue. So actually, most of these non-indigenous species in our system are actually not very a problem, but doesn't matter. If you have one it causes massive problems, then it's a real issue.
But if a newcomer turns up, I'm guessing initially you classify them as non-indigenous, new to town, and then they start misbehaving and they become a pest and you change their classification. Is that how it works?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I would say so, yes.
Right. And who makes that decision then? And does that actually mean that you can do different things, actually, because you've classed them as invasive?
I think that the experts are those that make this kind of decision. For example, to start, I would add that non-indigenous are not yet invasive. There is always a possibility that they might become invasive at some point. And when we classify a species as an invasive species, it means that we have noticed something going wrong, like impacts on biodiversity, on ecosystem services like tourism, fisheries, or even in health in cases.
I mean, with the algae that you're talking about, João, that's a clear example. I guess it was pretty obvious once it turned up that this stuff was going to start growing very rapidly and ending up on your beaches and causing problems for your tourism. But are people going out on a regular basis and diving and looking in the shallower waters around where you are or in the Mediterranean and sort of identifying activity and trying to understand impacts?
Yeah, I mean, we knew about this algae before. Right? So we knew that this could be a problem because our colleagues in the Azores, which is also part of Portugal, and we have quite a good synergy going on between both our island systems. So we knew they had problems. So when we found this algae in our coast, there was already an alert. I actually informed the local authorities, but there is not much that they can do. And I do think that that we scientists, we are the ones experts that actually classify them as non-native, invasive, or native. And then we inform authorities. But I think there is a communication issue between decision makers and scientists. I'm not sure how to solve that problem. Maybe with managers, but it's a complex system.
But when you say there's not much we can do, can't you just nip it in the bud, as you'd say in English, kind of go there and try and rip up as much as you can of that algae, or try and kill off as much of that particular kind of fish as you can in order to wipe them out before they get big?
It's not that easy. Sorry, João.
No, go on.
Go ahead.
No, it's not that easy because when it comes to terrestrial ecosystems, perhaps this could be a case. But when we talk about the aquatic environment and especially the seas, there are no borders. So if something, and there is always a lag, as João said, there is a lag of introduction, a lag of us spotting it. And in cases we spot it, but perhaps it has already gone away out of our possibilities. But
how long would the lag be? Are you talking about a couple of weeks or years? Or
depends on the species. It's not species specific. For example, I told you about the lionfish. We also knew that it would cause problems because this is the second invasion worldwide that the lionfish performed. The first one was in the Caribbean. So we knew that if we had it here, that would be a huge issue. The first sighting was in 1991, and then silence for many, many years. We never spotted another one. Then I think in 2003, there was another one in Israel. And from there on, it went like, it expanded, and the biomass we would get was like out of proportions. Now the lionfish is all around the Mediterranean. It's even in the coast of Spain, the Alboran Sea.
Right,
so
where the water temperature is quite different compared to the Eastern Mediterranean. But
yes, but this specific species is a really tough guy because it can reproduce at temperatures of 15 degrees.
Right.
And it can start. It's a voracious predator. It can eat huge amounts of food, commercial species, thus causing issue to the biodiversity. And it can stay alive without feeding for 1 month or even more. So it's difficult to tackle the lionfish.
Yeah, let me just add, I think this is important for our listeners and viewers, is that, I mean, in the oceans, eradication is almost impossible. I mean, 99%. It's in the oceans, you have, of course, horizontal spread, but also vertical. And that's a big issue. So just to give you an example, our colleagues in the Azores, they found green algae in the harbor of one of the islands. And they spent more than 1 million euros trying to eradicate with a lot of divers, with copper blankets and other methods, and they were not successful and they quit. It's really, really difficult. I mean, so in the oceans, our prime goal should be prevention. And that's why we should really take care of prevention and do a better job in preventing and involving citizens and all those things.
We'll talk more about that, but I would like to continue with our kind of definition of the problem, because when we talk about an invasive species, in my mind, I've got to be honest, I've got a kind of spiky, angry looking, not very nice fish is what I've got in my mind. That's my kind of typical stereotype of an invasive species. But João, you've already talked about algae, seaweed, posing a problem. Do these non-indigenous and sometimes invasive species come in all shapes and sizes?
Yes, they do.
The lionfish is a beautiful fish, amazing fish.
It is out of my mouth. Yes, most of the species that arrive in the Mediterranean are of Erythraean origin. They're like tropical fishes, so they have beautiful colors, beautiful shapes. And they are nice to look at. I already told you that the lionfish is also an aquarium fish.
Yes. But let's say, I mean, I'm talking about other kinds of organisms as well, though. I mean, are there, I don't know, crustaceans, or are there other kinds of, much smaller animals that are turning up from other parts of the world?
Yes, and I will refer to another very beautiful crab, the moon crab. It's a very small crab, and it's really beautiful as well. So it has got nothing to do with the aliens that we have in mind.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you another example. So we have a lot of, the easiest way for us to monitor invasive species is in marinas and harbors. So we actually deploy PVC plates, settling plates, to allow colonization of these communities. And most of the organisms that we find are tunicates, that are filter feeders, and they are colonies, and they are amazingly beautiful. I mean, beautiful colors, red, orange, purple. They're amazing, and they come from some from the Mediterranean, some from the Caribbean, in our waters. So they are really actually beautiful organisms. We have a lot of the sponges, bryozoans, all filter feeders. So it's not only fish and microalgae.
Yes.
Right,
So,
and then you've got parasites and things and little microbes as well that are coming in.
yes, and if I may say to what João just said, you are lucky because we have the Suez Canal. So monitoring is extremely very difficult. You can do that in the marinas and ports, but you cannot control what's coming through the Suez Canal. But I assume we will be discussing further on that.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, how do they get there? How do they get there? I'm sure there are many, many different ways on rafts, on plastic pollution, on ship ballast, through canals, etc. That's what I'm imagining. But is that right?
Yes, there are mainly 5 or 6 pathways. One would be through ballast waters, through ship hulls. We have aquaculture. We have contaminants as the parasites that you mentioned. And in the Mediterranean, we have a parasite that is destroying the fan cells, Pinna nobilis. So this is an issue for us. We have aquarium releases, people that get bored or feel sorry to kill their fish in their tank or aquarium. And
and they think they're doing a good thing by setting their fish free in the ocean. And in fact, they've created a new colony.
No, that's not good. And of course, in the Eastern Mediterranean, we have the Suez Canal. In the Mediterranean, we have more than 1,000 non-indigenous species. More than half of those come through the Suez Canal.
So that's just turned into an absolute highway then of invasive species, or non-indigenous. Sorry, I'm going to get my terminology right. Which leads me to another question, I suppose, which is this actually a pressing problem now, or is this something that's just continued now since the Suez Canal started, or is climate change kind of changing the situation a little bit because the waters are warmer, making habitats different?
I think it's a combination of things. Of course, the Suez Canal is a highway, and not to hell, but to the paradise of the Mediterranean for those species. No predators, new places to explore, no competition in cases. But I think that it started ever since the opening of the Suez Canal, and it is still ongoing. And as the water temperatures rising, it's more easy for them to settle, establish populations, reproduce, and
are there very warm water affiliate groups that love warm water that are turning up that are then finding it's still too cold in the Mediterranean and they die out? Does that kind of thing happen?
Well, according to recent research, we found out that especially for fish, temperature is the number one factor for non-indigenous species that facilitates their introduction and establishment in the Mediterranean. So I think that as waters are warming up, we are going to see more and more of those little buggers.
Yeah, I think climate change is basically amplifying invasions worldwide, and we know that we have species coming from southern latitudes to northern latitudes. And actually, we have a good example here in Madeira, because, as you know, the Canary Islands, which is a Spanish island system, is south of Madeira. And what happens there, it's like a mirror for what's going to happen in Madeira in future years. And we have many examples of species that were found first due to climate change in the Canary Islands and now are showing up in our waters. So we think that climate change is actually amplifying invasions worldwide.
But you're talking about species coming over from the Caribbean as well. How on earth do they manage that? How does a sponge get itself from the Caribbean to you?
So there are more than 30 vectors of introductions identified worldwide. I'm not going to cover all of them. By far, the most significant is shipping. And in shipping, you have through hull fouling. Basically, it's if you think about a Coca-Cola bottle, if you put them in the water for 2 months, you'll have a biofilm, a biological community.
You get quite a little party going on around that bottle, don't you?
And then if you imagine the same analogy in a ship hull, in a big ship, and if this ship comes to a different harbor, then you have a biological introduction. Also, as Voula said, with ballast water, I mean, these big tankers have big tanks and a pumping system, and they need to trim the balance of the ship. So when they discharge all the cargo in a ship, they need to balance the ship with water. And when they discharge this water in a different port, then you have thousands of planktonic cells that can cause biological invasion. So most species that we find in our system actually are coming through shipping, but there are other vectors. I can give you more examples if you want.
Is there anything you can do against that shipping vector, though? Is there, cleaning them, I suppose, but that sounds incredibly labor intensive. Is there anything you can do?
Yeah, I mean, there is already things that are going to happen. I mean, ships have in the hull, all these ships are treated with anti-fouling coatings, which are paints that are very rich in heavy metals, actually, like copper and zinc. And these invasive species, they don't like to grow in these hulls with these treatments, but some of them are actually tolerant. And in terms of ballast water, what happened in the past was that they were discharging the water not very close to the coast, but now ships are kind of obliged to have some sort of technology on board, for example, with UV, to actually kill all these cells. But it's not very.
Does that work?
It works, but it's not 100%.
Right. What else could you do?
In terms of shipping, I mean, you can try to force ships to change their coatings every 6 months, for example, but that's expensive. It's a lot of money, and companies maybe are not willing to do that. No. You can, for example, in places like the Galapagos Islands, you can try to, I mean, they're trying to do this when the recreational vessels arrive in their waters, before entering to port, there needs to be an inspection. And if you have X amount of invasive species, you need to go back. But this is a special location, so this is not happening.
No. Let's move on then to what we're going to do about them and whether or not there's untapped potential there as well. Let me come to you, Voula, on untapped potential. What could we be doing with these new species that are turning up?
Okay, the first thing that we can do, as you said, is eat them. If we cannot beat them, we should eat them. And when it comes to fish and crustaceans, this is an easy case. Most of them, except for the pufferfish, they are edible, they are tasty. And recently we did examine 4 species here in the Mediterranean, and we found that they are extremely very rich in essential fat acids. And the colleague that did this work compared them to bone filet, and they were equally, if not better than bone filet. So do eat them. We need to encourage fishers to go for them, and of course the consumers to use them. And if we want to scale up, also include them in the industry, like smoked, salted, canned, jerkies. We tried jerkies. We did lionfish kimchis. You can utilize them in several ways.
Are there countries in around the Mediterranean where that's working now and it's having an effect?
An effect, I'm not quite sure. It sure might lower the pressure to commercial species. But I know that in cases, some of those invasive aliens do support the local fisheries communities. For example, the Cigano species, the rabbit fishes. They support the local communities of Tunisia, Egypt, and in Cyprus they are sold for 30 euros per kilo. In Greece, we are just starting to eat them, so you can find them in places for 15 to 20 euros, and in others like for 5 euros. But
how do you make that change happen though? Because you've got to convince the fishers, you've got to convince the people who are regulating the fishing, you've got to convince the people who are selling it as well, and then the consumers, etc. Have they possibly got to change gear, fishing practices, etc.? It's a big ask, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but the fishers is the easy part because they catch them in any case.
Right.
They are there. The Mediterranean fisheries is multi-species and multi-gear, so they catch it. So the fishers really do want to sell them. The consumers is another issue, and we've been trying. We've been launching campaigns like having well-known chefs cooking them, providing people with recipes online. Having events in restaurants, media coverages for that part.
Does that work? Is it sort of working?
Yes, I think it works. For example, the lionfish, when it first came here, just because there was people were terrorized because of the case of Lagocephalus. They wouldn't touch it, and then slowly they started eating it. It's really extremely very tasty. And now it's being sold for 15 euros per kilo. In Crete Island and in Rhodos Island, some restaurants and hotels include it in their menus. People.
And I guess it's not marketed as an invasive species, please help them out the Mediterranean by eating this alien invader.
No, it is marketed as an invasive species. And
right.
This is something that we use like, do help us combat against the invasive species. So this is something that we do with those that can be eaten. Those that cannot be eaten, like the Lagocephalus, we've been trying to find other kinds of solutions. For example, my friend Eileen Ullman in Turkey, she has developed a small company, and she's taking the leather, and they are producing extremely very beautiful clutches, purses. They are even doing
we
shoes.
saw those. Yeah, we looked them up when we were researching this, and that's an interesting use. I don't know whether that would really have any proper impact, though, on the populations, but it needs to be amplified to a massive scale.
A massive scale, no, but you can help the fishers earn some extra money and try to reduce the populations. If we think large scale, then we would go to producing fish meals out of Lagocephalus.
Yeah.
We did that 2 years ago, and we did it experimentally. We managed to produce fish meals that were toxin-free. The fishes that we reared were absolutely safe for the consumers to consume, and now we are upscaling. We call that Lago Meal project.
Right, and that's interesting. João, can I bring in some of your experience from a different part of the world about what do we do with these things? Is there untapped potential, or are they just going to be a pest?
Well, I think I have a more conservative view. I mean, of course, we do not. I mean, I've been studying invasions for 15 years, and I mean, I'm not hiding or ignoring that there are positive uses of non-indigenous species. I mean, it's well known that many invasive or non-native species are already used, for example, for food and agriculture purposes and more. I mean, just think about cats and dogs all over the world. Highly valued as pets, although keep in mind that cats are a big problem for native birds in many countries. But I mean, I think that the positive benefits of invasions do not outweigh the negative impacts. I mean, just to give an example, a very recent assessment from IPBS, they said that the benefits to people that some invasive alien species provide do not mitigate or undo their negative impacts, and I do agree with this statement. I think if there's nothing else we can do, sure, we can eat them, and I'm okay with that. But I think
or feed them to other fish in aquaculture.
Sure, but I think we should do the best we can to prevent and to mitigate first.
Let's talk about prevention then. How do you do prevention? Because if you said there's basically a barrier-free zone, I don't understand how you can do prevention, João.
I think citizen engagement is key, is crucial. I mean, communication. I mean, this conversation is already great. I mean, we need to pass this message across. I mean, people need to know about this problem. Kids at schools need to know about this problem. I mean, education is fundamental. Social media. I mean, I think that's part of what we should be doing.
Well, there's awareness, but then the action. What action can I take? I'm aware of this now. What can I do?
Just a small notice. I'm full pro what you said. Of course, prevention is key and it comes first. And I don't want to be misunderstood that, okay, let's eat them, they're here. Of course, we need to prevent. And what can we do? I told you before that one vector, for example, is the aquarium releases.
Yeah.
Stop releasing. This is a huge issue, and not only for the marine realm, it's also for terrestrial ecosystems. The parrots, for example, the green parrots, they are highly invasive alien species, and they are causing huge problems.
They're very noisy too.
I think you can buy a lionfish on eBay now.
Not only lionfish, there is a wide variety of species that we already have here, like Plotosus lineatus as well, the striped cat eelfish, I think it's the common name. So first of all, we need to know that we should protect nature. We should avoid disturbing nature. And one disturbance would be releasing something that is not there anymore. In any case.
And that is a significant enough step. If you could stop that, the aquarium releases that you're talking about, you'd think that would actually make a difference. Compared to the Suez Canal, let's say, it sounds tiny.
The Suez Canal is there. I don't know if there are lots of actions that can be taken. Of course, there are some preventional measures that can be taken, but I don't know if that would be cost effective for those that...
And if you're in Madeira, an island in the Atlantic, you can't put a fence around it.
No.
What can you do?
No, but we could have, for example, especially with recreational vessels, we could have a system that could, nowadays we can have like low cost ROVs and underwater vehicles that could inspect the hulls of these recreational vessels before entering a marine. Of course, there is a cost for this, but I think people should be talking about this. And if this hull has a certain percentage of hull fouling, maybe they should clean first or go back to a different port. Of course, then there will be a problem for this other port.
Right.
And this is another important thing, is that regional... I mean,
you're saying like a boat that's just sailed across from the Bahamas and it turns up with you. You're not going to send them back, are you?
No, you can send them to a neighbor port in a Canary Islands, and then that's their problem. But it's not fair, of course. I'm kind of joking here, but I think it's very important that regional agreements are more efficient than local activities. So we should be working together, but because this is a global problem.
I was going to come to you with like, who would take on the responsibility to do the job that you're talking about? Who would hold their hand up and say, "Sure, I'll do that"?
I don't know. I don't have an answer. It's a hard issue. But I mean, we should be doing and discussing this with our neighbor countries here, and the same.
Would anybody have an economic incentive to do that?
Yeah.
Could you create an economic incentive to do that? Actually, Voula, do you think?
Why not? I think it could be a solution. Yes. I don't know what Voula thinks.
Yes, I fully agree. But you have to remember that as scientists, we can only provide advice to those taking the decisions. So I think that basically what João's work and mine and our fellow colleagues is to inform the public, inform the policymakers, and try to find the best nature-based solutions for preventing, to start with.
What would be a nature-based solution to try and deal with this problem then?
Well, exploitation is a nature-based solution, but it's not
fishing them, basically, but
yes.
bringing in something else, a predator that eats them, or is that really bad?
Biological control, that's a
No,
dangerous one.
No.
It sounds many unintended consequences on that one, surely. Yeah.
Yes, because it would be another species in another environment, and we are talking about biological systems. You don't know, even if you have all the data there, you never know how the system will respond.
No.
There might be some tiny little change where you cannot see it, or something that you never took into consideration, and then
little
everything
tipping points,
yes,
and off you go. What's the EU doing, João, to deal with this? How much are we getting in terms of effective policy from the European level?
I mean, our group, ICES, is actually giving advice. So, I mean, we have in our group, we have what we call the terms of reference in different topics on climate change, national reporting, marine debris, which is also a more recent vector that we've been talking about, aquaculture. So we try to provide advice to the EU. So as I said, members of our group report every year how many new non-indigenous species are showing up in their waters. And we have actually a database called Aquanis that is actually our operational and reliable, and we continue to update, and we also, this information is used for advisory purposes. So we write.
But is action taken on that information that you're providing to them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we report and we give advice, and then of course the EU needs to take decisions. For example, in terms of grants for science, there is a lot of investment in terms of research grants at the EU level for tackling this issue, not only for impacts but also for monitoring.
Yeah.
So there are things that we are doing. We do what we can.
But you can monitor, you can look at impacts, but after that, have you got any real tools to try and, at an EU level, to fix the problem?
There is also there are also calls for citizen engagement, for example.
Right.
For eradication as well, although we know it's different. So there are directed calls for research in terms of management as well.
Voula, I mean, you're also in the Eastern Mediterranean, where the EU is not in control of everything either. So it's a complicated picture.
It is true. Yes, but we get EU funds for all that stuff that João just mentioned. Plus, we get funding for, sorry, but I have to say that again, for exploitation.
Of course, yeah.
Yes. And we really try to find some solutions for that. This Mediterranean, yes, we are, the Mediterranean in general, it's a different kind of a story, because the north is EU, the south and east is non-EU. And we always face these issues when we are around the table with people from non-EU countries. Like I told you about the rabbit fish, the cigano species. In Tunisia, they are really exploitable. They want to conserve and preserve the populations.
Right.
But here...
It's seen as a commercially viable fishery then for them.
Yes. But when it comes to the EU, we have to follow the EU regulation to eradicate and if not mitigate. So I cannot conserve something that, according to legislation, should not be conserved.
No. But then when you say eradicate, talk me through how is that done? Are people going out and trying to catch as many rabbit fish as they can?
You cannot eradicate. I think that this should be clear. In the sea, you cannot eradicate.
But why even have a policy that tries to do that then?
Because it's an horizontal policy.
It's more mitigate.
Yes. The EU regulation refers to all ecosystems like terrestrial, freshwater, marine. So the eradication should be there, and I think it's likely to be there, but not when it comes to the marine. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why there is a union concern list. So the EU created a list of species that are of highly concern for the European Union. There, I think there are about 66 to 70 species. Only 2 are marine. 2.
Right.
A crab and a fish.
It does sound like that we're in a situation where we can't really fix the problem at all, João.
I don't like that.
Me neither.
I think, I always like to see the glass half full and not half empty. I'm an optimistic by nature. I think the next generation should be more inspired by these things. I think we should put all our efforts, as I said, in prevention, but also on early detection, because I said it's almost impossible, but it is possible. There is some cases of success. For example, if an invasive species is very constricted to a specific habitat, let's say a harbor, it is possible to eradicate. So if you actually are able to detect in time, you can save it. Okay, you can eradicate it.
Yeah.
But then if you can't, you can at least control, right? Or mitigate. And then, of course, the worst case scenario...
that is fishing them and eating them, or paying a bounty price on the head for the ones you don't want to eat, or whatever.
Yes.
Voula, can you paint me a positive and negative scenario of how things will evolve in the Mediterranean region that you know so well as we move forwards over the next decade or so? How are things going to pan out, do you think? And what's a best case scenario and a worst case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario, it's easier to tackle, I assume, because
listening to this conversation, we got a lot of worst case scenario.
Because, for example, the Suez Canal is being enlarged constantly and deepened. So the bigger it gets and the deeper it gets, the more newcomers we have in the area. So if this continues, I think that the news regarding the East Mediterranean are not that promising. And as I said before, as a scientific community, we try to alarm people to take actions. I have to say here that a good example would be the Panama Canal, because there they don't have such a change of species between the Atlantic and the Pacific. But then again, the Panama Canal used the Suez Canal as a no example of what not to do.
Yeah, but the Panama Canal, they have a lock system, and they have a freshwater lake in the middle, which actually works as a barrier. But do you think it's possible, Voula, to do something like that in the Suez Canal, having some sort of freshwaters?
I'm not an engineer, and I know that our last two barriers, like the salt lakes and the Nile, were demolished some years ago because the salt lakes are not that salty anymore.
Yeah.
And the Nile, we have the Aswan Dam, and so the Nile is not providing the East Mediterranean with fresh water anymore. But I think that should the engineers, along with biologists and oceanographers, sit around the table, we could find a solution, provided that somebody would like to invest to that solution. And perhaps that would be a good case scenario.
So political will.
Yes. Another good case scenario, because in the scientific community, we always discuss, and in some cases we agree, in some cases we strongly disagree. So there are some people saying, okay, they're coming, they're beautiful, what's wrong? We can become like Eilat. People would be coming to the East Mediterranean for scuba diving to see all the exotic species. I think that I'm not for that suggestion, but I think that if we cannot prevent, if we cannot early detect or control, then I think that in cases we have to find ways to live with them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that, but I really don't like it.
No, but it's new. It's new communities in your town, in your region, and you're just going to have to accept that that's how it is, and it's changed the landscape, and that's nothing you can do about it. Because, as you say, the environment is so different to what we have on land, you can't modify it necessarily.
I don't like losing native species. Lagocephalus has practically whipped off areas of Crete out of octopuses and other cephalopods. So I wouldn't like to lose the picture of octopuses hanging from a rope in the Greek islands. I wouldn't like to have an octopus on a drawing showing that to my kids, saying, these species used to live here, but this Lagocephalus arrived and ate them all up.
Yeah. But that is actually what you think might happen.
I hope not. I'm also like João. I like to see the positive side of things. I think that we should try and find solutions. We should.
But again, our mission as scientists is to inform. I mean, then maybe we need to improve this communication between us scientists and the decision makers. Maybe we have to inspire them. I don't know how. And maybe we need to do a better job in that regard.
I suppose the big thing that you can do is probably to convince them of the severity of the problem, sure, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, but we've been trying to do that. I mean, I was already at the EU Parliament with a colleague, Bele Galil, also from Israel, and an expert in the Mediterranean, giving talks to European delegates. I mean, we have been doing that. But I mean, as you know, it's a political system. People change every 4 years, and we almost need to start again. So
yeah.
And if I may add to that, João, we only realize the problem when it's at our doorstep.
When it's too late.
So now those are highly invasive hazardous species, and I can name more, are only in the East Mediterranean. And EU East Mediterranean is only Cyprus and Greece. When the problem starts expanding westwards, then I hope it will not be too late, but perhaps that would make an impact to the policymakers.
When you think Italy, Spain and France feel much more concerned, then it will have a bigger impact.
Yes, I know that in some other countries they have other issues, not like with the lionfish or the Lagocephalus species, but if they come to their doorsteps and they are already there, but not in huge numbers, then I think that they will start seeing this issue more seriously.
Yeah.
It's a lonely place to be, EU East and Southeast, when it comes to those issues.
Just a note on my positive thinking is that our group, the ICES group, celebrates 50 years this year. So we've been talking about invasions for half a century. So that means a lot. So I think it's an issue that we will never quit, and we will try to inform the best we can decision makers.
Good luck to both of you with this. It's been a fascinating conversation. To João and Voula, thanks very much for joining us on Ocean Calls.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks very much for watching this episode of Ocean Calls on YouTube. One more thing, please head over to your usual podcast app in order to listen to this episode with extra interviews and content on this topic. Catch some surprising facts and hear extraordinary tales of the sea from musicians, actors, activists and even astronauts. This season, for example, you'll hear from sex education actor Chris Jenks and fresh fish-obsessed Dutch chef Bart van Olfen. I'll see you soon.